Hi guys, my name is Amish Tripathi and I am the director of the Nehru Centre. The Nehru Centre is the cultural wing of the Indian High Commission in the UK, and we've been in existence for many decades, and we organize wonderful events at this very auditorium, which is in Mayfair in central London. Sadly, as you can see, the auditorium is empty. It has been empty since we were all put into lockdown due to the coronavirus pandemic. But what we Indians believe is that the other side of a crisis is an opportunity. And what we have done at the Nehru Centre is moved all our events online. So now if you attend our online events, every single seat is a VIP seat. Like you get a front row at our events. No trouble of parking, no trouble of travelling all the way. And most practically all the programs that we would do, like literary discussions and dance performances, musical performances, we are doing them all on our online channels. You can register for our newsletter at our website nehrucentre.org.uk. You don't need to write them down, they will be displayed at the bottom of the screen. You can also come to our Facebook page, which is a verified page, the Nehru Centre. You can follow updates on all our events on Twitter as well, the Nehru Centre, that's also a verified account. Or you can come to our YouTube channel, again, the Nehru Centre. We are nothing if not consistent. I hope you do come to our online channels and enjoy the events that we are putting up for you. Thank you so much for all your love and support. Namaste, Jai Hind.
Namaste. My name is Amish Tripathi and I am the director of the Nehru Centre. Today, as you all would know, is the 12th of January. It is the birth anniversary of perhaps one of the greatest Indians of the last millennia, Swami Vivekananda. His impact is so immense that we feel it till today. And we at the Nehru Centre and at the Indian High Commission wanted to celebrate the great man, the great monk, who had an impact not just on India and Dharma, but indeed on the entire world. And the best person to discuss this with is a brilliant scholar and journalist who's actually written a book on Swami Vivekananda, the modern monk. If we can bring Hindol Sengupta up. Hi, Hindol.
Namaste.
Pleasure
Lovely seeing you once again, Amish, and lovely to be in the Nehru Centre, at the Nehru Centre. I've done lectures at the Nehru Centre at the venue, but this is also a very wonderful way of being at the Nehru Centre and connecting with the Nehru Centre.
Yeah, no, I mean, we're all online now. Some Chinese dietary habits have forced all of us online. So we're going to focus. We are in the Nehru Centre. We are hosting this from the Nehru Centre. And this is before we start. We are a Sarkari place. Hindol, you know what it's like. So I'll have to do your official introduction before we get cracking. And here we go. Hindol Sengupta is a multiple award-winning author of 9 books. He is Vice President and Head of Research at India's National Investment Promotion Agency in West India under the Ministry of Commerce. He is the only Indian to have won the Wilbur Award given by the Religion Communicators Council of America for being Hindu in 2017. His latest book, The Man Who Saved India, Sardar Patel and His Idea of India, won the Value of Words Award for Best Non-Fiction Book of the Year in 2019. He is a World Economic Forum Young Global Leader and a columnist for Aspen, Italy. He has been a senior journalist for the Indian editions of Fortune, CNBC, CNN, and Bloomberg TV. He is co-founder of Grin Media Network, I love that name, Grin Media Network, which focuses on telling the civilizational story of India for the world. And most importantly, as you guys can see on the overlay of this wonderful program, Hindol is also the author of the book The Modern Monk, which tells us about Swami Vivekananda and the impact he's had on all of humanity, actually. Hindol, how we'll do this program, and for those on the audience out here, Hindol is gonna make a short speech on Swami Vivekananda, what he understands of him, and the universal appeal of Swamiji. Good 150, 170 years after he was born. He was born all the way back in 1863. And post that, Hindol and I will have a conversation. Hindol, the stage is all yours.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Amish. Such a pleasure. And thank you for inviting me to talk on Swami Vivekananda. My family has been associated with the Ramakrishna mission for 3 generations now. I myself got my Diksha at the age of 10. In a sense, I am a child of the mission. And it is a great honor and a privilege to be able to speak about Swami Vivekananda and to be writing about him and speaking about him. The topic that we have chosen, Amish and I, for today's lecture is the universal appeal of Swami Vivekananda. And in the next few minutes, I will try to explain to all of you why Swami Vivekananda, of course, is a great treasure of India, but his appeal is a global appeal. There is a universal appeal of Swami Vivekananda. Why is that true? Well, let's begin with the very first fact. Swami Vivekananda, as many of you might know, is the spiritual disciple of a man called Ramakrishna Paramhans, the great saint of Calcutta of the 19th century. Ramakrishna Paramhans was an unlettered village, man and a priest at the Dakshineshwar temple, and an enlightened soul who was the spiritual master, in a sense, of Swami Vivekananda. Ramakrishna Paramhans, after trying many paths to the divine, gave a certain phrase which encapsulated his teaching and also Swami Vivekananda's teaching, which is really the teachings, in a sense, of the Advaita Vedanta. We'll go into that in just a moment. But in Bengali, that phrase says, Joto mot, toto pot. As many as there are ways, as many as there are opinions, as many as there are minds and ideas, that many are paths to the divine, are ways to access God. So the first universality of Swami Vivekananda comes from the very slogan, comes from the very core message, comes from the very idea given to him by his spiritual master, which is spread around the world, that it doesn't matter what your path is, you will reach the same divine. In fact, to really borrow from Swami Vivekananda, who famously said, every soul is potentially divine. No matter what your path, if you start to discover yourself and the divinity and God within, you will come to the same place. That's the first universality of Swami Vivekananda. Going forward from there is a universal appeal to Swami Vivekananda because he's really the first Hindu monk from India who makes what we today would call a global splash. He's really able to come to the West and win hearts and minds in the West. Where the Nehru Centre is, in London, a lot of people were attracted to Swami Vivekananda after his talks in that city. And of course, everybody knows in America, both in New York, in Boston, in Chicago, across America, Swami Vivekananda won many, many, many hearts and minds. And then, of course, in the rest of Europe. This is really important because before Swami Vivekananda, there had been nobody who really went out and told the civilizational message of India, the core values of Hinduism, in a universal language, not only for Indians, but for everybody in the world who would care to listen. That, again, number 2, is the universal appeal of Swami Vivekananda. Remember, what propelled Swami Vivekananda to global acclaim was that famous lecture of his at the Parliament of Religions, where he gets up and says, brothers and sisters of America, and the entire audience burst into applause. So Swami Vivekananda was able to do what nobody had before him had been able to do. He was able to bring together the entire civilizational context and message of India and make it palatable, help the West understand what India's civilization was all about. Number three, remember Swami Vivekananda was doing all of this when he was a citizen of a colonial nation. India was ruled by the British when Swami Vivekananda left its shores and went to the West. The universal appeal of Swami Vivekananda comes from the fact that he did not allow colonialism to restrict him. He stepped beyond the boundaries of colonialism. He broke the shackles of colonialism and gave the message to the world that India needed to give. And he showed that even as a citizen of a colonial nation, one could have the sheer, dogged, determined confidence to tell the story of one's own civilization, even though one was being ruled politically by another country. That was the universal message of courage and conviction of Swami Vivekananda. Then, Swami Vivekananda has a universal appeal because he's not merely a distant monk. You know, when we talk about ascetics and monks and men of God and women of God also, we tend to think of them as secluded, sheltered, cloistered away somewhere, deep in meditation, deep in thinking about God, praying about God, and cut away from life in a sense. That's the idea of the ascetic, the renouncing ascetic, one who has renounced the world. Swami Vivekananda has a universal appeal because he showed that you don't need to leave the world behind to get to God. You can embrace the world. Because Swami Vivekananda, if you look at his work, he brought the divinity that he possessed within him into his everyday life. We are so fascinated by him even today because Swami Vivekananda was not only deeply spiritual as a monk, but he was palpably human. He's a man who got angry with his detractors. He's a man who loved food. He's a man who was a great cook. He's a man who traveled across Europe and America and took notes and compared breakfast and meals that different people and different cultures had around the world. He taught us that in order to love God and become divine and really understand the divine, you don't have to completely negate life. You can live while embracing the divine. That is his great magic. That is his great universal appeal. He shows us that we can be also human even while reaching out for the divine. Swami Vivekananda's other universal appeal, the idea of Swami Vivekananda is that here is a man who's really a Renaissance man in so many ways. He speaks beautiful English, writes beautiful English, equally adept in English as he is in Sanskrit. Because remember, that's how he accesses the great treasures of Hindu religion and Hindu philosophy. And he's able to marry these two things. He's able to marry his Western sensibilities. Remember, he actually was a product of a sort what we would today call a missionary school. So he had been taught all the great English poets and writers and all of that when he was in school. So he could marry all that education with the greatest and the most in-depth philosophies of Hinduism and bring together a message that was modern, that was progressive, that was forward-looking, and that appealed not only just to Indians, but to people around the world. Remember, that's why one of his most famous disciples, Sister Nivedita, she was not Indian. And this is how Swami Vivekananda was able to talk to people across cultures because he embedded and embodied all that marrying of the East and West within his very self and turned it into a tool to reach to the divine, to reach God. That's the great appeal of Swami Vivekananda. There is one more thing, I want to talk about Swami Vivekananda, and people often don't talk about it. I'm one of the first people who wrote about it in a long essay at Fortune magazine, where I was editor at large until recently, and I'm still a columnist. Swami Vivekananda is an institution builder. He built an institution that has lasted all these decades and become a global institution in more than 20 countries, 200 centers, without a single real controversy. And I call that, this idea, this management style of Swami Vivekananda, and I've written in Fortune, I call it a detached ownership management style. Swami Vivekananda showed his brother monks a detached ownership management style, which is why the Ramakrishna Mission has, after Swami Vivekananda's death, never allowed one single monk to become the lodestone of the organization. The lodestone is the words of Swami Vivekananda, is the words of Sri Ramakrishna, is the love and affection of Sharda Devi. And each monk, the organization is rotated among different monks who become president and so on and so forth of the organization, consistently teaching them that you are here to do God's work, not to take ownership. There's this wonderful story of Swami Ranganathananda of the Ramakrishna Mission, who was awarded one of India's highest civilian awards. And he said, I cannot accept it on my own behalf because as an individual, I am nothing. If you have to give it, you must give it to the entire organization. But those awards are only awarded to individuals. So therefore, he did not take it. But where does that come from? It comes from this style of Swami Vivekananda, that you are entirely devoted to the work, but you're not attached to the credit. If you think about it, this is the lesson Swami Vivekananda takes straight from the Bhagavad Gita, from the Ashtavakra Gita. The idea that you live in the moment, you are entirely consumed in the divine in the moment, and therefore, whether victory or defeat, you will do your task to the very end, but you are not attached to it. There's a wonderful story told about the Ramakrishna Mission. There was a home of Swami Vivekananda. There is a home of Swami Vivekananda in Calcutta. For many years, that home had fallen into disrepair. And the mission, after a lot of work, finally took over that home and rebuilt it, refurbished it, and made it into a meditational spiritual center in the memory of Swami Vivekananda. There was one monk who was leading all the efforts. For years and years, he worked and worked to make this project happen, coordinated endlessly with the municipal authorities, fought all kinds of battles to make it happen. One day before the grand inauguration of that place, he was shifted and transferred by the mission to one of the remotest centers of the mission. When the president of the Ramakrishna Mission at that time was asked, why did you remove him at that day? You could have let him stay one more day and allowed him to participate in the festivities, so to speak. He smiled and said, his job was done. His job was done. There is no attachment. His job was done. He finished his job and he's gone away to a place where he was really needed. So this, in a sense, is the legacy of Swami Vivekananda. I like to tell my younger friends, and I want to conclude so that we have some time for Amish and I to have a conversation. But I want to conclude, when I go to school especially, and there might be some younger people in the audience today, so I want to say this. I like to tell my very young listeners that Swami Vivekananda was a true rock star. And they always ask me, why rock star? So I tell them, look, here is a man who went from east to west and created a big splash, right? And won hearts and minds, had huge audiences. People, fawned over him, were mesmerized by his words. And also he knew what all of the best rock stars know, that in order to remain a legend, you have to die young. So they always laugh when I say that. What Swami Vivekananda achieved at 39 most human beings cannot achieve in many, many, many lifetimes. Right? And when before he passed away, Swami Vivekananda actually said he knew. In fact, he, in a sense, gave up his body because the body had lost meaning for him. And there is an apocryphal story, but such a story pregnant with meaning. Before he passed away, he was asked, "Why don't you stay? I mean, you've just only begun your work. There's such a long journey ahead. The mission has just begun." Swami Vivekananda said, and that's, I was talking about detached management. He said, "If I stay, all your journeys will be blocked. By going, I am setting you free so that your journeys and your paths, individual paths, are not blocked by me." Every time I say that, I get goosebumps, really, right? Because you can see the devotion only to the divine and the supreme lack of attachment to anything that the world has to offer. The idea is that to serve the divine and the divine alone. And today, more than ever before, at a time when India has shown the world that even during COVID, even with our population, India can be a source of healing, whether it is sending hydroxychloroquine tablets around the world, or now the Oxford manufacturing and sending the Oxford vaccine around the world. India is a place of great healing. And I think in many ways, one of its greatest messengers of healing was Swami Vivekananda. Thank you very much for listening to me. I would love now to have a conversation with Amish so that we can talk more in a question and answer format.
Oh, wonderful. What a fascinating speech and intervention, Hindol. Only you can do something like this. Brief, crisp, clear, and yet so thoughtful and meaningful. Thank you so much for that.
Thank you. Thank you.
If one thinks, right at the beginning, I mean, I will come to actually what are the messages that resonate today. But if we look at the time when Swamiji went to the West, and that was a time when the so-called reform movements would come from the West to the East. And here was one taking knowledge and wisdom from the East to the West. In that phase of history, it was a radically different thing to do. What was the relevance of that at that point of time? What is the importance of that at that point of time?
That's a lovely question, Amish, and you're absolutely right. When I talk to some of my academic gatherings about Swami Vivekananda, I like to, smile and say that long before Edward Said taught us about Orientalism and changing the gaze, there was another man called Swami Vivekananda who taught us, how to turn the gaze in a sense, right? Because he really turned the gaze. If you read Swami Vivekananda, of course, he's talking in terms of spirituality, but he's turning the gaze. He's telling the West that you thought you brought us modernity, but we were in many ways modern ourselves. Right? And you thought you brought us certain, and remember, that does not mean that he rejects Western values or Western civilization or mass, because he himself, in a sense, is a product of it. He studied in a particular school, he spoke English effortlessly, and so on and so forth, right? So he's a product of that. But he takes the best and is not chained by it. That's a very important lesson of, turning the gaze. He is not chained by the good of the West. He doesn't defer. He just accepts it and uses it. He doesn't defer to it. He retains the confidence to talk back to it. Swami Vivekananda, when he went to America, pointed out that the kind of racial discrimination that existed in America and the kind of discrimination that existed in America against women was unheard of, even in his own university, Calcutta University. Because remember, Calcutta University was one of the pioneering universities which opened its doors to women students coming in long before the top universities in the West. And Swami Vivekananda went and said this. Right? So in a sense, he turned the gaze And in that sense, he's a pioneer in, understanding Orientalism, what we later learned to call Orientalism, understand colonialism, and turn the gaze.
There's also, building a bit on what you said, we will come to, I do want to discuss his importance to India and the way we see ourselves today. But building a bit on what you said in terms of turning the gaze, uh, if you look at the West today, look, we're a diplomatic platform, so we never want to discuss politics. But many of our Western allies, the divisions that are there in society, uh, at times are deeply worrying. As as people who would like the West to do well, because I think they would be good allies for us Indians. But the divisions in their societies trouble at times and weaken them. What do you think would be Swami Vivekananda's message to them, an approach to them? That what are the roots of where these divisions are coming from, and can India and Indian wisdom, through the words of Swami Vivekananda, help the West?
Absolutely. I think more than ever before today, Amish, a very divided world requires the message that integrally human beings are one.
Mm,
This message in a deeply, deeply, deeply troubled and divided world. Already the world was very divided and troubled. Now technology has enabled us to divide even further and make the chasms even further, right?
mm,
Today the message, I mean, it is no surprise. I like to say that, Swami Vivekananda in 1893 showed us another 9/11. It was a different kind of 9/11, right? And that 9/11, rather than the 9/11 that we understand, showed a path of really cultures and peoples coming together,
mm,
recognizing that fundamental fact that every soul, every living thing has the potential of the divine in them,
mm,
and using that
mm,
to merge, to break boundaries, and to merge peoples with one another. This message, I truly believe, considering what we are seeing around the world, has perhaps never been more urgent than it is today.
mm. And if we turn the gaze back from there and look at ourselves, um, the way India has managed many of these the challenges of the last year or two, the pandemic, the economic devastation of it, um, uh, military troubles. What do you think? One of the things that Swami Vivekananda always spoke of was the importance of Shakti, uh, that you must have
Yes.
strength. What do you think he would say to the India of today and how we are handling things? Would he be proud of us? Would he tell us you can do better? What do you think he would think?
So it's of course hard to extrapolate that
Hmm,
into what would happen if he was there. But let me go deeper into your question. I think you ask a very relevant question. Let's discuss a little bit on Swami Vivekananda's idea of what he called manhood, by
hmm,
which he meant not just like for men, but for people in general, strength in human beings, right?
hmm,
Why is strength in human beings important? And he says this again and again throughout his work, right? That strength in human beings really is a very important aspect, and it is lethargy in human beings that
hmm,
pull down nations, right?
hmm,
So, enterprising strength in human beings is very, very important. That's why Swami Vivekananda once famously said that people can find God even by playing football. Now, what is he really saying, right? He's essentially saying that if you put your entire focus and entire devotion without any distractions in doing one thing and go deeper and deeper into it, you will get a glimpse of the divine,
hmm,
right? whether it's painting, whether it's writing, whether it's playing music, whether it's playing football, right? So therefore, this idea of strength, of energy, of enterprise is a very, very important Swami Vivekananda idea. And I think, today, in a sense, India's energies are being unleashed once again. I keep writing that some of it is because of digital technology, right? I mean, something like this has never happened in the history of the world. So many people democratically have never got access to this kind of mass information ever in the history of the world. It has never happened. So the energies that are being unleashed in India are something truly spectacular to behold, right? And I think, I definitely feel that if Swami Vivekananda, knowing how modern he was, he would definitely be a tech enthusiast today. Had he been, had he been here, you would have been doing this StreamYard conversation broadcast live with Swami Vivekananda rather than me. So he would have been a tech enthusiast, right? He would have been a tech enthusiast for sure, because he was really modern. He was excited about, he wanted to know how, the most modern ships were built, right? He wanted to know how the latest ammunition was being created. He had a very scientific mind. He's the one who inspired the Tatas to build the India Institute of Sciences, right, in a famous ship journey, right? So he was a man of scientific temper. He constantly spoke about a scientific temper. So I think he would be excited if he had been with us today by the energies that are being unleashed in India. He would like those energies, of course, to go into a certain direction of discovering a deeper truth.
But one of the things that, I mean, if we speak of India's rise, among the things that Swamiji was so adept at was actually the art of storytelling. What is essentially influencing people? The ability to tell stories, building philosophies, and communicating them well. India is rising. There are some, I'm in the West, in London. There are some who celebrate it, some who criticize it. What can we learn from Swamiji on how the story of India's rise should be told abroad?
Again,
not just talking about within India, but abroad.
Excellent story, an excellent question. Swami Vivekananda is, of course, a great storyteller. Because when he comes to the West, so little is known about India and its philosophies in the West. Swami Vivekananda finds a new language, finds a new idiom, finds a new way of telling the story of Indian civilization in a way that the maximum number of people in the West understand. There is a great narrative lesson for India even today from the story of Swami Vivekananda. Learn how to tell the story of your civilization better. That's the great lesson for today's India from Swami Vivekananda, because he did it with such panache. He did it with such gumption. He did it with such style, if I may say so. Right? What is the grand narrative of India? What is the narrative attributes of India? How do we tell the story of India better? Swami Vivekananda was a great exponent in that style.
If I have to probe you a bit further on this, if you, as someone who's read and studied Swami Vivekananda, as someone who's a brilliant scholar and a journalist and a thinker, what do you think are the key things that stand out of the India story? What is our narrative? It's difficult to encapsulate 1.3 billion words in a very pithy line, but if you have to think of a few pointers, a few things that define the narrative of India's rise, what do you think it would be?
So, Amish, and I've been writing about this, so I'm happy to share this with you. I think one of the things I just mentioned, never before in the history of humankind has information flown to this kind of grassroots level, in a democratic edifice ever in the history of mankind. This is unprecedented. What's happening in India is unprecedented. And I have recently written into the Fortune magazine that there are three key narratives I see that India must use today. One is of holistic health. And that's the three pillars there are the wonderful work we are doing with the vaccine, the wonderful work we have done in controlling COVID, and Ayurveda and yoga. The world is seeking new natural ways of healing. India has some of the most potent stories to tell there. That's number one. Number two, the other great narrative that we have is the narrative of the one that I was talking about. Tremendous flow of information, empowering the largest number of people using technology in a democratic edifice. Never done before, never at this scale. So, this is unprecedented. That's the other story. And the third story is equally exciting and particularly relevant after what we've seen in the last few days. The greatest democracy on earth, a democracy that, with so many states, effortlessly, smoothly conducts regime change after election without any controversy. This is a magnificent achievement. These are the three pillars of the India story today, as far as I see it.
It's a fascinating point. I couldn't agree more. We have over 800 million voters. Voting is done smoothly. Results come out within a day. A professional election commission. We do it at a scale and a price that is unbelievable. And all credit to our politicians. It's so easy to criticize politicians, but I think Indian politicians don't get credit where it's due. That if they lose the elections, across all parties, they quietly resign and leave, and most of them actually come back for the swearing-in ceremony of their successor.
Absolutely, absolutely.
Yeah, and that is something worth celebrating, and we must credit our politicians for that. But building a bit more, just probing a bit further on the second
Sure.
point that you made on information flow. Uh, there is fascinating stuff happening in India. Uh, and Swamiji himself was an exponent of let's spread knowledge, let's spread information. But sometimes with that, there is also a lot of noise. Uh, Noise that can one has seen in Western countries as well, but noise that is rare in India as well. How do you think learnings from Swami Vivekananda? Because yes, of course, there are huge benefits to this information flow, massive information flow. There are huge challenges as well. There's tremendous noise. What can we learn from Swami Vivekananda to mitigate the risks of the kind of world that we live in today, the hyper connected world we live in today?
See, I think Swami Vivekananda's great lesson there is the propagation of an inner life. I want to answer your question slightly differently, Amish. If you look at the history of the world, Amish, there has never been really a time like the time we are living in, where most human beings have forgotten to have any kind of inner life. Even in the last generation, there were people who would always make it a point to go to some spiritual place once a week, if nothing else, once a week. They would go to church on Sunday, or they would go to the temple on Tuesday, or whatever. They would do something, right? But we are living in a time when a large number of people have no inner life at all. We're living in a time where a large number of people have forgotten the need to have an inner life. And if you really want to cut off noise, you have to first cut off noise from inside you. And I think India is best placed to tell the story once again for the need of an inner life. Because human beings cannot survive. I mean, in spite of all the technology and stuff, an unprecedented surge of loneliness, suicides, depression around the world. So, therefore, an inner life is so critical for human beings. And throughout history, people have always had an inner life. It's only today that we have forgotten to have an inner life, right? And I think India again is in a great position to tell the story of the need for an inner life.
No, fascinating point. And Swami Vivekananda is one of the best ambassadors for that. Another thing that he is a wonderful ambassador for, which you spoke on briefly in your speech, was that he was an institution builder. Um, One of the things that India is criticized on, though we have built fantastic institutions in some areas, in election commission and in the modern way, many of our government processes have been improved drastically. The way subsidies are given out, for example. But yes, to be fair, one can say that often in India, institutional capacity, both at a government level and at a private sector level, for the scale of our country, is relatively weak. Um, we need learnings there. What are the learnings we can draw from Swami Vivekananda ji, who clearly knew how to build institutions and institutions that
Yeah.
last?
One of the great things to learn there is the point of collective responsibility. The Ramakrishna Mission has survived because responsibility is always taken in the Ramakrishna Mission in a collective, which includes people. It's an inclusive way of running the organization. It includes people. And this is a great management style. It has survived for so many years because it has this inclusive nature. It's always a body of people who take decisions. The other thing, very important, empowerment of localized centers. The localized centers of the Ramakrishna Mission don't always operate only on the basis of what Belur Mutt is saying, the headquarters. They are tremendously empowered to take many decisions of how it's run on their own at a localized level, at the ground level, depending and changing, depending on which area they exist, which country they exist. It's local culture, it's local flavor, and so on and so forth. So that's really important. This ability and flexibility and freedom to operate individual, the hub and spoke model, where the spokes each have an individual freedom to run in the way they want, and Belur only gives a framework, right? So I think that's really a model to learn something from.
Hmm. Can you build that up with some examples of the mission, perhaps in the West or outside of India, but even some examples. You gave that wonderful example of the one who worked on the monk who worked on Swamiji's house as a meditation center. But are there examples of great institution building? Institutions are essentially they provide the ability to get humans to work together over
So let me give
various
you an example.
generations. Are there examples like this?
Absolutely. Absolutely. Please note the effort that the Ramakrishna Mission has made again and again to ensure, note the efforts that the Ramakrishna Mission has made again and again to ensure that its ties with academia remain extremely strong. And this entire academic point of view is a very, very important attribute of the Ramakrishna Mission, because not only has the Ramakrishna Mission led and built some of the best academic institutions like the Narendrapur School and others in India. Do you know it is a mission, a monk who even today is the chaplain for both Harvard and MIT?
Really? My God, I didn't
Yes,
know.
it is a
So that shows the
Ramakrishna
quality
Mission
of
monk.
training. That
It is the Hindu chaplain in Harvard and MIT, generation after generation, is a Ramakrishna Mission monk.
wow,
And the sitting
very
monk is
interesting.
Swami Tragananda. Generation after generation, the monk has been from the Ramakrishna Mission.
Hmm.
And not just for Howard, but also for MIT.
Hmm.
Right? And a lot of Ramakrishna Mission monks produce scholarship of their own. In the morning, I was doing a lecture with our embassy in Seoul on Swami Vivekananda, and a Korean researcher asked me for a book recommendation. And I mentioned this brilliant book by a young Ramakrishna Mission monk called Oyon Maharaj, which has been published recently by Oxford University Press, called Infinite Paths to Infinite Reality. Right?
Hmm.
And that's not the only one. Some of the biggest or most scholarly people in India traditionally have been Ramakrishna Mission monks. Let me equate that with, if you go to Oxford and Cambridge, many of the professors are actually ordained priests, right? And then they teach theology, they teach history, all kinds of things, right? Ramakrishna Mission actually has it. There's a Maharaj called, or we call Maharajas in Ramakrishna Mission, the monks. Mahan MJ, Mahan Mohan Maharaj, so to speak. He is one of the best known topographical geography scientists in India. He teaches at the Tata Institute of Fundamental Research in Mumbai. He was a Sloan Fellow, when he was working in America. And 50% of the people in mathematics who get the Sloan Fellowship go on to win the Nobel Prize.
Wow.
This is the level of monks that they have cultivated over the years. And this is not an aberration, this is the rule. Such people are the rule in Ramakrishna Mission. They're a standard, right? So the cultivation of these people and the freedom given to them to continue their research while they remain monks has built it and given it strength. So you see, it all comes down to Swami Vivekananda's famous point about the quality of human beings. They just have a different quality of human beings, right? So this, and I have met, like, it is no secret that Ramakrishna Mission monks are some of the most erudite and highly educated scholarly people, including Swami Ranganathananda, who I mentioned earlier in the lecture. You look at his lectures, look at the books he's written. Do you know the Ashtavakra Gita? I've just finished writing a book on the Ashtavakra Gita. The translation that I used is a translation, a definitive translation made by or written by a Ramakrishna Mission monk. Wow. So the Advaita Vedanta, the Advaita Ashram and Mutt, their publishing program is world class. It's truly world-class publishing program because they have the monks who have that scholarly level to produce work of that stature. This is very little known because they do so little self-promotion. And I'll tell you, you and I have discussed things like this in the past. When Mohan Maharaj was asked, he won the Shanti Swarup Bhatnagar Award, one of India's highest prizes in mathematics, right? A few years ago. And then the Infosys Prize for excellence in mathematics. When he won that, a television channel went to talk to him in Mumbai and asked him, what does God mean to you? And he said, God is maths. And the reporter, as always, was really flummoxed. He said, oh, what do you mean? What do you mean? Does that mean more secular? And he said, no, I don't think you're understanding what I'm trying to say. You're asking me what does God mean to me. I'm telling you, as a mathematician and a monk, God to me is mathematics. But that level of intellectual, we have lost that intellectual ability in our public sphere in India, right? That's the problem. And I think you were talking about institution building. Institutions got built, or Ramakrishna Mission got built because they cultivated from day one people like this to become monks. Even today, if you go to Calcutta, one of the great libraries of Calcutta, perhaps the greatest library of Calcutta and cultural center, is the Gold Park Ramakrishna Mission and its cultural center. It's a world-class center, even today. So you see, what I'm trying to paint for you is a picture that Swamiji's influence, because he was such a intellectual dynamo, right? He was able to imbibe in his organization those values which were then continued by these people, generation after generation. Right.
If if there are any, guys, please feel free to post your questions. I'm so sorry, the person who was hosting it has had a power cut and he's just logged back in from a pad. But keep posting your questions; he will post them up. But Hindol, if I can just build a bit on what you said of the intellectual standards in the public space, right?
Yeah.
In the public space. Now, in some ways, modern India is, in terms of intellectual caliber, it's the best of times, it's the worst of times. We have fantastic achievements in medicine, vaccines, for example, in
Absolutely.
technology, in new ideas on how to explore what is the idea of India. So we have some great new stuff happening, but simultaneously the public space has become full of noise, full of uh, tribalism. Anyone who's even slightly calmer or wants to debate actually wants to stay away from the mess in that. So it's a very bizarre dichotomy. What do you think? What can we learn from Swami Vivekananda to get some sanity into the public square?
No, I think one of the great lessons of Swami Vivekananda is that even though he was a monk, and look at the interesting thing, his own spiritual master was an unlettered village priest, right? But Swami Vivekananda was an intellectual,
Hmm.
right? And he did not, I mean, while the Ramakrishna Paramahans was a spiritual master, he did not, he took all that spiritual knowledge and flowed it into his own intellectual stream and strengthened him through it, right? He didn't give it up. So I think we can have all the debates in the world, but we have to learn from Swamiji that intellectualism is not a bad thing, it's a good thing, right? And also the other great lesson I think is to resolve the noise. Swami Vivekananda was a great writer of letters, writer of essays, and a great reader. And since you and I are both authors, now's the time to mention on this thing that please read books. You may read all the WhatsApp messages in the world. You may read all the Twitter messages in the world, including from Amish's feed and my feed. It cannot replace books. Please read books. You can read our books, you can read somebody else's books, but please read books.
Especially read The Modern Monk by Hindol.
Thank you very much.
And the cover is right there.
Thank you very much. Yes, you can read, like I said, Amish's books, my books, but you can please read books because there are very few things. If you want to really go in depth into a subject, there are very few ways you can do it without reading good books, right? And please don't desert the world of books. Read them, whether you read them on a Kindle or wherever you read them, read the books. And if there's one thing to learn from Swami Vivekananda, it is to read a lot and write a lot, right? So this, I mean, it sounds very simplistic, but it's very hard to do in our busy lives. And I don't think we should forget it.
Yeah, true. And if we can do that, hopefully we can improve the quality of the public square debate as well in India. That certainly needs some improvement. There's a question here from Ram. Why is Swamiji's teachings not been practiced in India deeply, especially to remove the caste system in Indian society? What do you say to that?
Well, I think the caste system in Indian society definitely has gone down in many ways. What happens is that because of technology and media today, every incident, is instantly splashed all over the world. But I think the data clearly shows that the numbers have steadily gone down. And in many cases, I mean, this is a whole new conversation, and I'll keep that for another day. But I would not agree that caste violence, especially, has not gone down in India. It has gone down. Yes, it is true that there are still some terrible examples, and we have to eradicate those examples. But it's a long haul. It's a long haul. Prejudice, once it grows in human minds, it's very difficult to take out that prejudice, right? But I do think with every new generation, this edifice has only become weaker and weaker. I definitely believe that.
Yeah, no, good message on that. There's a question from Shantanu. Hindol sir, what message will you give to the youth of India on this occasion of National Youth Day?
Please read books. Please read books. I wish the youth of India read more books. I mean, that's really become my thing. Please remember, and genuinely, I mean this seriously. Look, we are living in an age of information overload, right? And often you cannot really verify whether information coming to is true, false. You don't know. You're like, oh, my brother sent it, my sister sent it, my friend sent it, it must be true. But often it's not true, it's false, right? So therefore it is incumbent upon all of us as individuals to become better informed individuals,
Hmm.
and to verify the information that comes to us, before we rush to a judgment and rush to an opinion.
Hmm.
Please stop rushing to opinions. Please verify, re-verify, check before you make up your mind.
Building a bit on this, on what you're talking about on information, um, it was something that one started seeing in mainstream media and legacy media, and now slowly it appears to be, the beginnings of that process in social media as well, where even information flows gets divided according to ideologies.
Yeah,
So people will constantly keep hearing things which reinforces their point of view, which
absolutely.
reinforces the tribalism that tends to exist, especially in the public square and the debating space. A, do you think this is a realistic fear? B, if it is a realistic fear, what do we do?
No, no, this is absolutely a realistic fear. Very, very realistic fear. Please see what's happening in some other large countries. This is a very realistic fear. And the more we go into these, self-isolating bubbles of echo chambers, the worse the world is becoming. We have to make a conscious effort to move out there and listen to a different point of view. I make sure that I usually read or usually follow accounts which dramatically disagree with me. At least 50% of the accounts that I follow and 50% of the stuff that I read are people who completely disagree with me. Now I may completely disagree with them and they with me, but yet it's important for us to learn to understand where that person is coming from, even if we don't agree. If I don't agree with something, it doesn't have to be hatred. It's a very important lesson to learn, because please remember, the lesson of moving forward always is bipartisan. Without bipartisan coming together, bipartisan agreement coming together, you can never move the world ahead, right? So, and if you think, if all of us think that the moment somebody disagrees with us, that person deserves to be destroyed, we will never move forward. We have to try and find the middle path. I know the middle ground is shrinking, the middle path is shrinking, but some of us who are on the middle path, who are on the middle ground, must vocally say that we must make an effort to keep this space.
No, I think that's very wise advice, Hindol, and I'd certainly support that to everyone. Try and listen to those you disagree with. That doesn't mean you have to agree with what they say, but it actually improves the quality of your thinking. For all of us, only listen to those opinions that reinforce our viewpoint. Yes, we are in dangerous echo chambers, and you see the results of that in some Western countries, and it's troubling. I mean, because they are our allies, and it's troubling to see. There's another question, Hindol, from Shushil. Do you believe Swamiji's teachings need to be included in the new education policy 2020? As I'm sure aware, the NEP 2020 came out. And how can it be ensured that it is included in the NEP 2020?
Well, I think thematically, many of his themes are already included, right? I mean, the new education policy has a focus on, technological education. It has a focus on making education far more egalitarian. It has a focus on making education far more, learning oriented rather than just result oriented. All of these things are, I think, from Swamiji's lives and teaching. Remember, Swamiji necessarily wasn't a very good student in school or college, right? And I actually derive great pleasure from saying that, just to annoy my parents. When I was much, younger, I used to say this to annoy my parents. But but
Was he a troublesome student? He was the kind who threw chalk?
no, I think he was just a, yeah, maybe he threw chalk. I don't know whether he threw chalk, but he was definitely, as I say in my book, he was definitely a naughty boy. He was definitely not calm, studious type. He was a naughty boy. So yeah, maybe he, he threw a couple of chalks. I mean, who knows, right? I mean, so I take great pleasure in, in this, to be honest.
Okay, what a wonderful place to end a truly fascinating conversation at Hindol.
Thank
This
you.
is
Thank
the
you
birth
very much.
anniversary of Swami Vivekananda ji, 12th January, one of the greatest Indians of the last millennia. We would all do well to learn from him, be inspired by him, spread his message across the world. It'll help the world a lot more. And I will say it once again. I thoroughly enjoyed The Modern Monk when I read it, and it's Hindol's book. And do check it out. It is available in India, and I believe in the UK as well through Amazon on Kindle. I read it in India, so do check the book out. The cover is you can see it and on the overlay. And thank you so much, Hindol, for gracing the Nehru
Thank
Centre
you.
stage.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Amish. Thank you very much. Delighted to be at the Nehru Center once again and delighted to be in conversation with you once again. Thanks a lot, ladies and gentlemen. Thank you very much. May the power and the blessings of Swamiji be with all of you. Thank you.